Next is Charles Devlin. Charles, yeah, there he is.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Charles Devlin, president of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation. I have with me tonight, with great reluctance, that I need to present to City Clerk our termination of the agreement with the city. It will be in effect in 90 days. As I said, I do this with great reluctance, as I had hoped that our dealings with the ad hoc committee would have a different result. But this lease agreement proposal that you see shows that we have not been successful. So I want to thank the board. I would like to thank my board, but I'd also like to thank the City Council for pointing me to this position. Other than the last few months, it's been with great pleasure that I've led this organization, and especially been able to interact with the incredible board members, staff, and our volunteers who work very hard, and it's all about because they care about the ranch. So I also have, I think, at your place, my comments on the agreement and my hope that we will be able to continue the negotiations during this 90-day period. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about our position on the agreement or the termination at this time.
Thank you. Any questions at this time? Do you have any questions? Mr. Moshe?
Got a few. Give me 1 second here. Charles, first of all, I want to thank you and your service, and the board service and the volunteers and the staff, and I think I don't have anything negative to say about any of you personally, not one bit. I read your letter that you had sent, and I saw the reference to the termination agreement, or the termination notice. I'm having some trouble, and I have some questions, and I want you to help me through this. In the original letter that you did send to the city initiating the whole ad hoc process, the negotiation between the city and the CRF, you did mention that self-sufficiency may no longer be attainable, especially in light of changes in the event business and the ever-increasing costs of maintaining historic properties. As staff had mentioned in their staff report, you had made mention of the Leo Carrillo Ranch model, and we researched a lot of that very thoroughly. In the lease agreement that's proposed, and that we had sat down, we discussed earlier last week, what proposed in the lease agreement doesn't jive with some of your concerns outlaid in initiating this process. As I saw it, you had concerns about the ranch, the self-sustaining manner of maintaining the ranch. We're going to take all that responsibility and burden the cost of that. We're going to take the utilities and we'll burden the cost of that. We will, in light of the fact that the market is regularly changing and the market may be, there is some volatility, and it kind of ebbs and flows with economic cycles when it comes, as it pertains to the rental business. We are going to take that as well and hopefully use that to offset all the costs of the other things, of maintaining the property and paying the utilities and the like. In that, what further concerns do you have in regards to the agreement? What specifically does the lease agreement as proposed not quite cover, or what would you like to see us to more thoroughly discuss?
Well, in the agreement, the city still requires a foundation to maintain the interior of the house. That's unacceptable. This is your property, Sean. It belongs to the city and its citizens. You need to take care of it. And as pointed out earlier, and as you know, in almost every occasion that we've found, the city or the entity that owns that property provides for that upkeep of that property entirely. At Leo Carrillo, city of Carlsbad takes care of that entire property. Now, what Carmen failed to mention is, in addition to take care of the landscaping, outsourcing the events, it does not cover all the cost. In fact, the city manager that we met with said there's probably an additional $500,000 that the city contributes to that property for its preservation and upkeep. $500,000. Are you ready for that?
Well, I don't think that the taxpayers are going to burn an extra $100,000, but
$500,000,
or
$500,000.
$500,000
It's 25 acres.
versus
It's a 25-acre property, and ours isn't.
as it pertains.
I was at that property. I know what goes on down there. I interviewed the manager responsible for that and the caterer that they've outsourced it to.
So Charles, so in regards, you made two comments. I want to ask follow-up questions as it pertains to those. So your understanding, this agreement, we would take care of the plumbing and the electrical, the bones of that house. If the roof leaks, we will patch the roof, fix the roof.
As you should.
As we should. That's perfectly fine. That is very similar to a landlord and a tenant, right? If I were renting an apartment to you, I would suspect that I would be responsible for making sure that property is adequate. As a tenant, you're going to come in and you can paint the walls, you're going to vacuum the floor, you're going to put your furniture about and whatnot, and you're going to conduct your business and whatever it is you want inside that apartment or home or whatever you want to use, whatever analogy you want. But I don't see the relationship, or I don't see that language differing much from a normal lease agreement in that we'll make sure this thing is standing, we'll make sure it's adequate, we'll make sure the water's running, the electrical is on, that neither of those pose any kind of risk to the house and or the functions of the CRF as they conduct their business inside that house. But that you guys do currently maintain and own the period pieces. The furniture in that house is largely donated, and a lot of board members have procured that on behalf of the CRF. I would suspect that seeing that you're using it day in and day out, I hope that you'd vacuum the floors, and occasionally go in and polish some of the wood and the molding or whatnot. I don't think it really constitutes a significant financial burden, is what we're proposing. That most of the financial burden in terms of the preservation and the upkeep and the maintenance of the property is going to be burdened by the city in this lease agreement.
Correct, as you should be. The issue primarily is the fact that you're taking all of our revenue, I think at least 90% of our revenue, which leaves us very little, if nothing, to put on events, and you potentially may be taking our staff. So in effect, we'll have nothing if we agree to this lease agreement. And I think more importantly for me personally, this is the city's property. You should be maintaining it.
That's largely what we're proposing.
You're going to do that money that we have raised in the wedding business that we built.
Right. Which is what, back in 1998, I don't mean to get, I don't want to argue with you or anything here. I mean, back in 1998, and I have a copy of the minutes, and when the CRF was originally created, and it said the site could also be rented for business meetings and conferences. The resulting revenues, along with those from all rentals, would be used for maintenance and upgrading the property. And we're keeping in line with the original intention that this rental business would be used to offset the cost and the maintenance and the upkeep of that property, so that, like many of these historical properties in a lot of these different municipalities, they don't become what many have effectively termed a money pit for taxpayers, that we're not dumping $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in trying to maintain them. Here we actually have a sustainable model. We've figured out a sustainable way of maintaining these properties without overly burdening the Camarillo taxpayer. I think that's financially prudent. To your point about money, I won't argue that this does constitute a shift for the CRF. and there's some thinking that has to be done on your feet, and there's going to have to be some reorganization as to how you fundraise and the efforts put into primarily event fundraising and donations and memberships. I do know that as is proposed in your guys' budget for this next coming up, or this upcoming fiscal year, you propose that you guys are going to receive or earn $120,000 through donations and event revenue. You have approximately probably a little less than $200,000 in liquid assets in the bank. And then, as per the lease agreement, we're going to, in that the Camarillo Ranch Foundation will be able to keep deposits, all deposits made up to, for events booked on, before, or after, up to November 1st. There's probably approximately about $100,000 in kind of what I'll term as passive income that you guys will be able to take, but you guys don't necessarily, you guys will book it as revenue, but you guys don't necessarily need to service down the road when it's actually recognized as revenue and the event occurs. So I would think that the assets that you guys have, between the assets you have, the $100,000 in passive revenue, which will stretch out over the course of about a year to a year and a half, and the $120,000 that's already coming in via revenue through donations and event revenue, I would hope that that would buy you guys what I would assume would be somewhere between a year to 2 years to invest more time in when it comes to donations, trying to develop more sustainable events, and the like, and finding alternative revenue sources to maintain the education, celebration, and events, all that stuff. Tell me where I'm off base. Tell me where you have concerns within that.
Well, let me go back to your statement about 1998. You think the world is a little different today in 2019 than it was in 1998?
Certainly is.
You think that house is a little older in 2019 than it was in 1998?
Certainly is.
You think the cost of maintaining that house has increased since 1998?
And it certainly has.
So that's my answer. Let me ask you a question. I think you asked Brian about, is there any clause within this lease agreement for the foundation to come to the city and ask for assistance or financial assistance or something to that effect?
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you, or let me ask you, what happened when the foundation approached the city, I did it in writing, and said we had incurred extraordinary accounting costs as a result of the changes that were required by the city as a result of the audit. $19,000, which we can document, and I asked for that. And what was the city's answer?
In a nutshell?
Yeah.
In a nutshell, that we felt that responsibility was yours.
The nutshell was no. Not only no, but hell no.
I wouldn't put it like that, but
Well, I will.
that's
I'll
fine.
help you. I'm not an elected official.
Sir, sure. I was
By
not.
the way, Sean, I don't think this is a place to negotiate this agreement. If you folks are interested in further negotiation, we're open to that. The clock's running.
That's fine. I'm just trying to solicit. I'm looking for more information from you as to your position, your feelings in regards to the lease agreement.
I think that should take place at the negotiating table. We have an ad hoc committee, and that's what it's designed to do. And I think we, in effect, are wasting these people's time in this kind of detailed discussion. I'm available. My team's available. Call us if you want us.
Can I have one last question?
You bet.
During the ad hoc committee meeting, we were talking about maintenance and the upkeep of the property and the costs there too. You had mentioned, you made a statement to the effect of, we haven't properly upkept the property. We've definitely cut corners, and we haven't invested the money necessary into properly maintaining that property.
That's correct. We haven't because we haven't had the money.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other question?
Any other questions? Yeah, Ms. Santangelo.
Well, I want to thank everybody here tonight as well. I don't want anybody to think that we're not taking this very seriously and that we don't fully appreciate all of the time and hours and effort that you have spent. This is a very important part of Camarillo, and so I appreciate all of your efforts. I appreciate all of you being here tonight. I'm not on the ad hoc committee. And so in order for me to be able to hear some of these things firsthand, a lot of Mr. Molche's questions were very useful to me. Because I don't understand completely where you're coming from. And I want to go back to your letter. The need to pursue events in order to, quote unquote, preserve them and maintain the property is distracting us from making it a focal point of the community for educational enrichment and enjoyment and to exhibit the diversity, history, and culture of the city. When I read that, to me that meant that the private venue business at the ranch was, as you said, distracting it from the main purpose of the ranch. And so when I entered this and tried to figure out where we're going to go, I very much thought that perhaps the venue rental was not, that's an intense market. And perhaps, and that being said, perhaps that's not fair to put on a group of volunteers whose true purpose is to maintain the historical aspect of the ranch. And so I really thought that we were coming at this as a way to help the ranch foundation, not to take something away, but to make it easier for you to fulfill your purpose. I have not, I've seen the word greed here a couple times, and whatever. We're not looking to make money off of wedding venues. In fact, I think we're actually taking on a volatile market. We may actually lose money in doing so, because we have also talked about taking over a lot of this maintenance. So my question for you is, if you had your ideal, what is your want? What do you want from the city?
First and foremost, the board would like the city to maintain the property in its entirety.
So let me drill down on that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to drill down on the interior. So you want them to furnish it, to replace period pieces? Because that's the difference we're talking about. As Mr. Molche said, we're talking about maintaining it as a landlord would.
Correct. And I think in terms of those kinds of detail, I mean, in terms of who cleans it, who polishes it, who does those kinds of things, I think that's a matter of negotiation. But when something fails, for instance, and let me give you an example, we've been told that our hardwood floor has been sanded as much as it now can be sanded. So the next stop is replacing the hardwood in that house, which will be a pretty expensive endeavor. So if I were a landlord, and I don't like to talk in those terms because I don't feel like a tenant, but if I were a tenant and the hardwood floor of my home was at a point that it needed to be replaced because it had been sanded as much as it could, I would look to the landlord to replace that. But that's a matter of, I think, some negotiation that the foundation is more than willing to enter into. So first and foremost, maintaining the property as it should be maintained, and to develop a plan for the future that will address the future needs of that property. And I mentioned that we both have reserve studies conducted by the same organization, and that would be a good beginning point. So the city could look out ahead and appropriately budget, and the board would like to be part of that process. So that's first and foremost. But the other, I think, important issue, and I want to come back to this outsourcing of the commercial or the wedding events process. And let me tell you, I built my businesses on outsourcing to government agencies, that they felt like they could not perform the kind of work that my companies can do, so they outsource it to me. So I'm a believer in outsourcing, don't get me wrong. But I want to make sure that the work we've done with the team that we've built continues. And the board is very concerned and protective about these hardworking employees who've really done an extraordinary job of turning this foundation financially around. And I'll be responsible for the person who set that bar and said, we are going to perform, we're going to change the financials, and we're going to do it by June 30. And we've done it, and we will do it. And I'm proud of that, but it's not me personally. I didn't personally do it. It's these people that did. So going back to that outsourcing, and I think there was a quote that there really wasn't any alternatives out there that was looked at, and I appreciate that you may not have been involved in the conversation, in the negotiations. But we proposed, the foundation proposed, what I called a gain share, but really was a profit share. So that at some point, and we just arbitrarily set that point at $80,000, the first $80,000 that we made would go to the ranch. Well, I'm sorry, would go to the city. And it would tier up. So if you looked at that, you would earn the first $80,000 of that revenue business if you kept it with us. And then there's another tier. But if you combine that first 80 with the 86 or 7, Marty, I can't remember what it was, for 19, that you have in your budget, that would give you an excess of $160,000 to maintain that property. So there is an alternative to what's being discussed, a profit share alternative that we proposed and was rejected. And we get to keep this staff in place. And you don't have to enter into that risky wedding event business. We'll take that risk.
But with all due respect, you taking the risk, if the foundation can't maintain it financially, that ultimately falls on the city, does it not?
It does, but we have some reserves in place.
That's all.
Anybody else have any questions? No. Charles, I just have one, and I want to get back to a little bit of the maintenance, because I think we've got some questions here about the inside maintenance of it. And you had mentioned that at some point the floor is going to be replaced. Now,
Yes, sir, soon.
my thinking is that that would be a capital improvement, and the owner of the facility would pay for that, somewhat akin to a lease that you have. Now, anything else in the if you look at your particular situation here with the Camarillo house, like the cleaning and any of the light maintenance and whatnot, that would be the foundation would be able to pay for that. Now, anything, let's say if there's a refrigerator there, or if there's a plumbing leak or anything like that, then the city would take care of that. So my question is that you talk about a little bit the maintenance of the inside of that building. Maybe you could educate me a little bit more about what that would constitute, other than just like a capital improvement or some heavy-duty repair and replace.
Well, I think the proposed lease agreement is, for the most part, silent on that. It talks about the wallpaper, for instance. It's like, well, you know, why should we be responsible for replacing the wallpaper? But for the most part, Kevin, I think those are issues that we can negotiate. Mm-hmm. The large concerns, let me give you an example of those legacy trees. We don't have any expertise in terms of maintaining those trees. I came into the ranch as a master gardener, and I can tell you, when it comes to trees, I know enough to be dangerous. We need an arborist to be able to look at those trees on a regular basis and tell us if something's going wrong, and then do some preventative maintenance rather than have a limb fall off on one of our guests. So we don't have an arborist. We can't afford an arborist. The city has contracts with arborists. I think you even have one on staff. But that's an example of something that we currently are responsible for. We have considerable exposure, I think you do too, but we don't have the ability to take care of those trees. We want the city to do that.
Okay, thank you.
But that's exterior. He asked you about interior things, other than the floor, which you told us about.
Charlotte, we can
I'm
negotiate
just-
those issues. Those
Well,
are
these
my-
people have not been on the ad hoc committee and cannot be by law, so they're wanting more information.
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for my board in that regard, other than to say I believe that's an issue that we can negotiate, and then, when appropriate, if appropriate, add that to the lease agreement. Who's responsible for what?
And in the lease agreement, it already says that the city would take care of everything on the exterior, including the landscaping, which is the old trees and everything else that's there.
As you should.
Well, I'm just saying it already says that.
And I appreciate that. I have no argument with that.
Okay.
And-
Sounded like you did.
In terms of the interior of the house, that's a minor issue that I'm sure we could work out quickly. Who does what in that house?
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, as a follow-up
Mr.
question
Shea?
in regards, Charles, because, and I have a lot to swallow because you just served us with a 90-day termination notice. What would you, assuming that we can't find common ground and we can't come to agreement, what would happen to the CRF? It's my understanding, and I'm going, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, or city attorney or you, Charles, or anyone else, but if we in fact would go through at the end of the 90 days and we terminate the operating agreement, the CRF is a nonprofit without a ranch, right?
We intend to seek legal counsel to help us with that issue.
Okay. My greatest concern and what I want to, and I don't know if if this termination was voted on by the board or whatever, but if you become a CRF without a ranch, then, and I know this has been a concern, but there are in excess of $200,000 in deposits or liabilities. Most of that constitutes venue deposits. If you don't have a venue, then what becomes of those deposits? I presume that they would either need to be refundable or that would need to be transferred. If so, then the CRF is upside down to the tune of about $50,000. And there's going to be a hole there. Not to mention, I know there's some other things too, contract with the caterer, and also in your endowment, you have certain restricted funds that can't be used for, say, reimbursing deposits or the like. So I don't know where that puts you guys financially if you're not in a position to service the events that you have essentially agreed to. And so I just have a general concern about that. I want to air that concern, so I want to make sure that everyone doesn't jump over a cliff, because there may be extenuating circumstances or situations that might arise out of that, let alone legal ones. And I want to make sure we can avoid those. I know that the CRF, the board, retains D&O insurance, which is directors and officers insurance. I don't know to what extent that kind of insurance covers what situations. And I would absolutely recommend you look into that as well, though, and making sure.
We intend to seek legal counsel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's all the blue cards I have.